Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something pretty big, these recent U.S. tariffs set for 2025. Specifically, we're going to focus on how they're hitting the machinery and equipment industry.
Yeah, and our mission today isn't just to list the tariffs. We really want to dig into what they mean on the ground, how different subsectors are affected, how manufacturers are coping, the supply chain side of things.
And importantly, the role market research is playing in all this adaptation.
Exactly. It's becoming critical.
Yeah.
And we're basing this on a new report from Cognitive Market Research, just out April 24th, 2025.
Great. Okay, let's jump in. So what are the main tariffs we're talking about here, the big headlines?
Well, the report flags a few key ones. First, there's a pretty hefty 25% tariff. This is on components for construction and earth-moving equipment.
Okay, like what kind of parts?
Think hydraulic cylinders, transmission systems, those heavy-duty, high-strength steel frames. If they're coming from China, they get hit with this 25%.
Ouch. That must be causing some headaches for the big U.S. manufacturers, right? Like Caterpillar, C&H Industrial.
For sure. Even though they build a lot here, their supply chains are global. They often source specialized bits from Asia. And the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, AEM, they've already put out data showing imported component prices are up on average somewhere between 18% and 26%.
Wow, that's a big jump.
It really is. It fundamentally changes their cost structure.
Okay, so construction gear is definitely feeling it. What else?
We're also seeing tariffs hovering between 20 and 25% on things like industrial motors, bearings, gear assemblies.
That sounds like a really broad category, stuff used everywhere.
It is. And here's the thing. China and Vietnam together supply over 40% of U.S. imports for these items. So these tariffs are really forcing a tough decision.
The classic build versus buy dilemma, but now with a massive cost factor thrown in.
Exactly. Do you pay the tariff or do you try to make it yourself or find it somewhere else? Which isn't easy.
And are finished machines getting tariffed too? Like a whole tractor?
Yes, finished agricultural machinery is also seeing tariffs, though generally lower, more in the 10% to 15% range.
Okay, so tractors, harvesters, irrigation stuff.
Right, even precision farming tools. This mainly impacts imports from the EU and Japan.
So maybe not as high as the Chinese component tariffs, but still it adds another cost layer for dealers and distributors selling to farmers.
Precisely. The report points out these guys were already dealing with, seasonal demand, different regional rules. This just adds another complication, another cost pressure that might eventually trickle down.
Okay, that gives us a good map of the tariffs. Let's dig into how this plays out on the ground, sector by sector. Construction machinery, first bulldozers, excavators, all that heavy stuff.
Right. As we said, many rely on Chinese parts, high-torque engines, heavy-duty hydraulics, steel components. That 25% tariff, mid-size manufacturers in the report estimate it could bump their unit costs by, say, 15% to 22%.
15 to 22%. That's huge. It must make bidding on construction projects much harder.
Absolutely. We're already hearing from U.S. firms involved in infrastructure, housing. They're reporting cost overruns.
And delays.
And delivery delay. Yeah, getting the equipment is taking longer. So naturally, there's a big push now to find new suppliers.
Where are they looking? It can't be simple to just switch suppliers for these critical parts.
No, it's tough. The report mentions India, Turkey, some countries in Latin America as places procurement teams are actively scouting.
But it's more than just finding someone who can make the part.
Right. Oh, definitely. This is where market research is crucial. They have to really vet these potential partners, check their quality, understand the logistics, the political risks, and even look into local incentives. Some countries might offer deals to attract this kind of manufacturing. It's a complex evaluation.
Building reliable, resilient partnerships, not just chasing the lowest price tag.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot to agriculture. How are things looking for farm equipment?
Well, modern farming is so tech-heavy now. Combine harvesters, GPS tractors, irrigation controls. They all need sophisticated components.
Microcontrollers, electric drives, specialized frames.
Exactly. And many of those are imported and now face these tariffs.
And I imagine the smaller manufacturers feel this the most.
That's what the report suggests. Small to mid-sized companies often lack the buying power or the diversified supply chains of the giants. So these costs hit their bottom line harder.
So what's happening at the dealer level?
Dealers in places like the Midwest, the Great Plains, they're reporting rising retail prices. And even a bit of a dip in equipment leasing activity. Farmers might be getting more cautious.
Holding off on upgrades, maybe, because of the cost. So how does market research help here in the ag sector?
A few things are popping up. One is looking at modular design. Can they make equipment that uses fewer of the tariff hit parts?
Interesting.
Another is consolidating suppliers, maybe focusing more on the EU where tariffs are lower. And crucially, using research to forecast farmer behavior. How will preferences change with inflation? Will they opt for simpler machines? Maybe.
That's a fascinating angle. Could we see a temporary pullback on some tech adoption? Okay, let's switch to packaging and material handling, the stuff that keeps e-commerce moving.
Yeah, that sector's boomed, right? Huge demand for conveyor systems, robotic arms, sorting machines.
And they need motors, control panels.
Exactly. And those components are often imported and now tariffed. But the big story here is a definite shift away from Chinese suppliers.
Why specifically?
It's a combo. The 25% tariff is one thing, but there are also some export restrictions from China on certain embedded electronics. It just makes relying on China seem much riskier now.
So they're scrambling for alternatives.
It are, and they're really rethinking the risk of having all their eggs in one basket. Market intelligence is key here.
Uh,
It's helping them build these hybrid sourcing models, maybe assemble the final machine here, but get submodules from, say, Poland or Thailand or South Korea.
Spreading the risk.
Right, but that means doing deep dives on vendor capabilities, lead times. It's a lot more complex logistically.
Makes sense. Okay, what about industries with really long project cycles, like energy and mining, drilling rigs, turbines, huge trucks?
Yeah, their procurement can take years. They're seeing tariffs on critical parts like specialized bearings, hydraulic drives, sensors rates from 20% up to maybe 34%.
That's significant.
It is. But there's another layer here. Chinese export restrictions on rare earth elements.
Ah, yes. Crucial for magnets, right?
Crucial, especially for things like wind turbines, deep mining equipment. The restrictions are driving up prices and creating uncertainty about supply.
So what are they doing?
Market research is vital for them. They're doing feasibility studies for regional assembly hubs, looking at import substitution for those rare earths, building really complex long-term cost models to handle these shocks, trying to future-proof, basically.
A lot of strategic planning needed there. Okay, one more sector, factory automation and robotics. Seems like they'd be very reliant on international parts.
You nailed it. Huge growth, but heavily dependent on Asian sources for precision gearboxes, sensors, embedded software, the brains and guts of the robots.
Yeah. So the tariffs hit them hard.
Definitely increases their landed costs for these critical parts, which puts U.S. integrators in a tight spot. They need to preserve their margins, but clients still expect top performance at competitive prices.
A real squeeze. How's market research helping in this high-tech area?
We're seeing some sophisticated stuff.
Yeah.
Evaluating technology, licensing deals, maybe making some parts themselves or through partnerships,
Right.
analyzing IP risks if they shift production, say, to Eastern Europe.
And maybe M&A?
Yeah, SWOT analyses for potential mergers and acquisitions are common. It can be a way to grab critical tech or secure a supply chain link. Very strategic moves happening.
Okay, so we've seen the impact across different sectors. Let's pull back again. Just how big a player is China in supplying the U.S. with machinery overall?
The report really emphasizes this. China's role has been massive.
Yeah.
Industrial machines, construction gear, farm equipment, machine tools, components like bearings and pumps. You name it.
So the U.S. built up a significant reliance over the years.
A very significant reliance. And these tariffs really highlight the risks involved in that, given current trade tensions.
And it's not just about direct imports from China, is it?
No, and that's a key point. The report estimates something like USD 30 to 40 billion worth of machinery imports come from places like South Korea, Japan, Mexico.
Okay.
But a lot of those machines contain components or raw materials that originally came from China.
Ah, so it's a hidden dependency, the ripple effect.
Exactly. Even if a machine isn't stamped made in China, its cost might still go up because of tariffs on Chinese parts used by the manufacturer in, say, Mexico.
Wow, that makes it incredibly complex to track.
It does. This interconnectedness means the pain spreads. Manufacturers are facing higher overall costs, it messes up their pricing, makes forecasting supply chains a nightmare.
A major disruption to the whole global system. So what are the direct impacts on manufacturers and their suppliers?
Well, the immediate hit is higher input costs, as we've discussed. If they're still buying from China, they're paying 15–30% more for things like precision gears, hydraulics, electrical systems. That eats into profits.
And it must strain relationships with those Chinese suppliers they've worked with for years.
Absolutely. Those relationships are under pressure. Companies are actively looking elsewhere, Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Vietnam. And there's definitely more talk and action on reshoring, bringing production back to the U.S., or maybe nearshoring to Mexico.
But switching suppliers or setting up new production isn't trivial, right?
Not at all. The report mentions high upfront costs, needing to adapt to different regulations, different ways of doing business. It takes time and money.
And are we seeing actual disruptions,
Yeah.
delays?
Yes. More supply chain hiccups generally. Logistics bottlenecks, orders taking longer to fill, production cycles slowing down. It's making it harder to meet demand, especially in sectors like construction and agriculture that need equipment now.
Okay, so costs up, logistics tangled, relationships shifting. It really underscores why the report emphasizes market research so much. How exactly does it help cut through this mess?
It's become fundamental. One huge area is supplier mapping and risk assessment, finding and properly vetting alternatives to China.
In India, Mexico, Eastern Europe, like you mentioned.
Right. Research helps evaluate their costs, their capabilities, their quality, the political situation, the rules, everything you need to know before you commit. The goal is building a supply chain that's diverse and resilient, not just cheap.
So reducing risk by knowing the landscape. What else?
Component cost and pricing analysis, tracking how prices for key parts, engines, pumps are moving, understanding why they're moving, raw materials, shipping costs.
So you can negotiate better
Yep.
or adjust your own prices.
Both. It helps renegotiate contracts, forecast where prices are headed, and figure out how to price your own products to protect margins without scaring off customers.
Makes sense. Can research also help change the product itself to avoid tariffs?
Yes, that's bill of materials or BM optimization. Research can pinpoint the most tariff-affected parts in your machine.
And suggest alternatives.
Exactly. Maybe a different material that does the job that isn't tariffed, or a different way to manufacture the part, lowering cost while keeping quality up.
So tariffs could actually drive some design innovation. Interesting. Now, ultimately, manufacturers have to sell this stuff. How does research help figure out how much cost they can pass on?
That comes down to demand forecasting and price sensitivity analysis, using research techniques, conjoint analysis, elasticity modeling to figure out how customers will react to higher prices.
How much will the market bear, basically?
Pretty much. It helps them adjust product features, fine-tune pricing, maybe change promotions, all to keep sales flowing and stay profitable. It's a balancing act.
A very tricky one, I imagine.
And finally, with all this uncertainty, how does research help companies brace for whatever comes next?
Through regulatory tracking and scenario planning, trade rules are always changing. Research keeps companies updated on new tariffs, trade deals, geopolitical shifts. And scenario planning.
Lets them model different futures. What if tariffs go up? What if they go down? What if country X imposes export bans? It helps them build flexible strategies to adapt quickly. Building resilience is the name of the game.
It really sounds like market research has gone from nice to have to absolutely essential. The report mentions specific strategies companies are using now. What are some examples?
Yeah, we're seeing clear trends. Big players like Caterpillar, John Deere, they're actively diversifying production, increasing capacity in places like Mexico and India, moving some work out of China.
Geographic diversification.
Right. And also more investment in automation within their plants. Using robots and smart tech can help offset rising labor or component costs.
Are they changing the products themselves too?
Yes. Product reengineering is happening, trying to design out reliance on tariff-sensitive parts, using different materials, different technologies.
And managing the supply chain itself.
Big focus there, too. Adopting digital tools, AI, machine learning. Companies like Bosch, Siemens are using these to get better visibility, predict shortages, streamline purchasing. Faster, smarter decisions are crucial now.
Lots of adaptation, driven by necessity. The report also had a couple of punchy, fast facts that really hit home.
Yeah, one was just reinforcing that point about relocation. It specifically called out Caterpillar and John Deere actively setting up shop or expanding sourcing in India and Mexico. It's not just talk, it's happening.
And the second one put a number on the trade impact.
It did. Analysts are predicting, because of these 2025 tariffs, a pretty sharp drop in Chinese machinery imports to the U.S. over the next year, somewhere in the range of 27% to 34%.
27 to 34%. That's a huge shift in where equipment is coming
A
from.
massive realignment, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive on the 2025 machinery tariffs?
I think the key points are pretty stark. These tariffs are seriously reshaping this industry globally. They're creating real cost pressures, they're disrupting supply chains that were built up over decades, and they're forcing companies into major strategic changes in sourcing and production.
And market research is central to navigating all that.
Absolutely indispensable now. It's moved from being a support function to a core strategic weapon for dealing with the uncertainty and making the right calls.
So thinking about all these big shifts, this interconnectedness, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the unintended consequences going to be? Ripples into other sectors, impacts on global economic stability down the road.
Yeah, and what new innovations might pop up because of this, or new regional trade blocs forming. It's a period of huge change.
Definitely leaves us with a lot to think about. Thanks. This was incredibly insightful.